In 2009, the Federal Trade Commission created a rule that banned native advertisements without disclosure. We weighed in on the idea back then, saying that for $11,000.01, the fine was $11,000, we'd post native advertisements for you. And a couple of months later followed up when it turned out that the lovely Ms. Kim Kardashian was tweeting at a rate that could cost her money if the FTC caught wind. The following year, the joke was that the FTC fines for undisclosed native advertisements was completely blown up. A public relations firm was doing exactly what the FTC rule prohibited, settled with the FTC, and paid not so much as a cent in fines. Now, we've used Ms. Kardashian as fodder for stories here several times, rarely in a complimentary way. Nevertheless, despite just how unimportant Kim Kardashian should be, she remains an advertising juggernaut, except now, native advertisements without disclosure have become a real issue. And there's a problem with native advertisements. Let's start with a disclosure. At a very real level, I'm not sure native advertisements are necessarily a bad thing. Sure, they're manipulative and they're sneaky, but we no longer live in a world where clean journalism is either very highly valued by most or even noticed when it's practiced. Does the former journalist in me see that as kind of sad? Yeah, I do, but the unwashed masses just are not paying close enough attention for disclosure to be the issue any longer, else Donald Trump could not be occupying the position of political prominence he currently enjoys. On the other hand, native advertisements are a huge problem for the same reason they aren't. People don't pay attention. Now, I'm not interested in politicizing this issue. The post you're reading is about the things you need to do to ensure your content marketing works, and the short of it is that unless you want to deal with both the distraction and cost of the FTC knocking on your door, there are some steps you need to take to eliminate, mask your native advertisements. Fortunately, there are just two, and they're simple. First, assume that anything you write with a connection, and not just links apply here, any kind of connection, any kind of wording to anything else that you have any reasonable expectation of profiting from, will be a target for questions. And second, mark those items as such. The trick here, and I'm not a lawyer, is the visibility of those markings and where you present them. The simplest interpretation of the FTC's rules on native advertisements is that a disclosure must appear on every page where items that might be thought of as advertising appear, and so we get paid for some of the stuff we write, in the footer of every page will probably suffice. But if you choose to go that way, know that unless your footer is always displayed, you'll have a problem if the FTC comes calling, and if disclosure down there in the part of your pages that most people ignore is tiny, the conversation will probably swing in ways you'll find uncomfortable. The next way to address this is that the links you use might be identified directly. For example, if you hover over the words, "I'm not a lawyer," at the beginning of the prior paragraph, you'll get a pop-up that describes what the link points at. That's also fine, maybe. The use of pop-ups has declined to the point that just getting one to appear on your page isn't always easy, and I've had people tell me that pop-ups are bad because blind people can't see them. Well, I'm choosing to ignore that second part as politically correct silliness, and the first part is unfortunate, but not terribly difficult to address. Contact us if you want. Leaving us, assuming you want to believe your native advertisement's defense is bulletproof with only one choice. Anything that's an advertisement gets marked as such directly, but even this native advertisement strategy is not perfect. See this involved fancy article in the New York Times? It's not an article at all, but if you stumble on it, you wouldn't know that until you got to the very bottom where you see, in that tiny type in the footer I mentioned before, this disclaimer. This page was produced by T Brand Studio, a unit of the advertising department of the New York Times in collaboration with Shell. The news and editorial staffs of the New York Times had no role in its preparation. Now, is that deceptive, or is it an appropriate native advertisements disclaimer? I expect we will find out eventually, but the Times is not helping their case by having the logo of T-Brand Studio look just like the logo of the New York Times itself and prominent. So yep, that's right, the disclaimer's tiny. It refers to a segment of the New York Times company that uses the jealously protected New York Times logo, and that logo's all over the page. So of course the article's a native advertisement, you must be thinking? Well, probably not. The FCC/native advertisements issue, like so much of what happens in content marketing, is complicated until you decide to adopt a strategy that makes it less so. And in content marketing, it may turn out that the hardest part of your job is not creating the content, but creating the rules and the system for rules that you use creating it. Want to talk about it? I'm the Answer Guy, and I'll be back.